I admit it. I spent a lot of time talking online about Elon Musk last year. I took the bait. I was frequently outraged and annoyed by trollish tweets from the then world's richest man. And I made that clear on multiple platforms. I even tweeted at the Tesla CEO multiple times asking him to come on my show and finally answer some real questions. And I have a feeling this kind of attention is just what Musk wants. Since taking over Twitter, Musk's posts per day nearly doubled, according to one analysis. And engagement with his account has skyrocketed, including an almost 100% increase in likes. After all, he's now the second richest man on Earth and the very vocal owner of one of the most influential communications platforms there is. That is difficult to ignore. But ignoring him is exactly what some journalists are advocating. Laura Miller writes in Slate, as with most trolls, the point of Musk's vapidly provocative tweets is to offend and alarm his ideological enemies, whose outrage only serves to boost his signal to the great big world beyond Twitter. And in New York Magazine, Ross Barkan argues that Musk's shenanigans distract from the sins of other billionaires who may be even doing more damage to our political system. Suddenly, I'm having flashbacks to the Trump presidency, where we were faced with a similar dilemma. How do you cover a powerful troll without boosting his ideas and giving him the attention he craves? Or is it possible to ignore a troll, a super influential troll, without also allowing him to evade scrutiny? The Twitter CEO may not be as powerful as the former president, but Musk's influence, and I would argue negative influence, on our politics, on our democracy, on our media, is pretty undeniable. So when ignoring Musk and tweeting at or about him both have good arguments in their favor, what's a Twitter-addicted journalist like myself to do? We talked about Twitter trolls nearly 1 year ago exactly, before Musk's Twitter takeover, with two people who are back with me today to revisit that conversation. Vanity Fair special correspondent Molly Jong-Fast, also the host of the Fast Politics with Molly Jong-Fast podcast, and John Scott Railton, a senior researcher at the Citizen Lab, which focuses on the intersection between information technologies, human rights, and global security. Thank you both for coming back on the show. Molly, this is just another iteration of the question I've been asking since Trump ran for president. How do you cover the ridiculous or even dangerous things that Elon Musk says or does on Twitter without amplifying that message, without giving him more of the attention that he so clearly craves?
Well, so we have had this problem for a long time, right? We had it with Trump. I do think, though, that this kind of attention tends to peter out pretty quickly. Like with Trump, it didn't. It sort of lasted long enough to get him elected. But it didn't, it didn't work for him again in 2020, right? We got a little smarter about the way we covered him. And it certainly hasn't worked for him, Trump had a lot of these people like Carrie Lake, who sort of, while they got a lot of media attention, weren't able to capture votes. So I do think that there's sort of a time limit on it. And you see with Elon, he dominated the news cycle for, a couple months, but now he's sort of, every tweet kind of hurts him. He's in a kind of weird self-destructive tailspin at this point, which I think is pretty interesting.
It certainly cost him a fair few billion. John, are there lessons to be learned from how we rightly or wrongly covered Trump's tweets when he was on Twitter, when we now deal with Musk's massive and very trollish Twitter presence?
Good to be back here. I think that the outrage that we experience and often express about Trump is part of what got him to where he is. And since Trump's rise and fall, we got a couple lessons. One is, now that he is harder to amplify, there's more friction when it comes to moving Trump from Truth Social and what he says there into Twitter. We see that he loses a lot of his teeth. Musk now is kind of the new person who has created a huge amount of anger and frustration at what he said, and is again riding that same way. But as Molly points out, he has also entered a self-destructive cycle. I think that the main lesson to be drawn here is we have to be careful and not play into algorithms that push us to amplify and provide larger platforms to people we disagree with. If you wouldn't hand out a pamphlet full of a person's views, you shouldn't be quote tweeting them.
It's a very good point, and it all sounds great in theory, but in practice it becomes much more difficult. Molly, let's have a look at two different Elon Musk tweets from the last couple of months. This one from the day before Election Day: to independent-minded voters, shared power curbs the worst excesses of both parties. Therefore, I recommend voting for a Republican Congress, given that the presidency is Democratic. He's, of course, entitled to his opinion, but that was a pretty big deal of a tweet. You've got given his reach, given his influence, the owner of Twitter saying on Twitter, vote Republican, that was worthy of discussion and sharing and condemnation from those who didn't like that tweet. And then, Molly, there's this very, very mature response to a critic telling him he's paid the most ever to be an internet troll, and he replies, and you have tiny testicles. Two very different types of tweets from the same troll. How should people be responding to each of these tweets? Because I get the argument from John that maybe we shouldn't amplify the testicle tweet. On the other hand, if the richest man in the world on Twitter is saying vote Republican, that is worth sharing, commenting on, and criticizing if need be.
Yeah, that's a hilarious tweet, too. Meanwhile, it turns out he didn't vote in that election, right? So, he was, advocating. He ideologically is Republican. There's no mystery there. And in fact, I think one of the things that had really enabled Trumpism and enabled Musk to a certain extent was not being clear about what was obvious, right? Like, we know that Elon is alt-right, right? He responds to people on the far right. Maybe he's not alt-right, but he responds to people on the far right. Those are his people. That is his crew. Those are his journalists. Yeah. So to say he's, this sort of nonpartisan actor isn't fair. And so when you see that tweet, again, and this was the thing with Trump, too, Trump would say these things and people would be like, well, I wonder what the truth is. We know the truth. And I think that what sort of helped with, Molly, fighting information with Trump was this.
Let me jump in, Molly, and just say you were talking about we know the truth. Part of me, Molly, worries that we're all very plugged in. So we kind of say, oh, and Elon did this, and Musk did that, and Trump did this, and certain person did that. We're kind of familiar with the personalities. We're familiar when he's responding to some rando online. We're like, oh, that guy's a Holocaust denier, or that guy, we get all that. The average person doesn't follow this stuff, doesn't understand, the various intricacies of different factions of the online right, doesn't even hear about, for example, the Musk testicles tweet or whatever it is. And I wonder, Molly, is there a case for saying, you know what, we amplify it, or, amplify is not the right word, but we engage with this stuff and we share it because we want other people to know that this is what the owner of Twitter is saying, or this is what the president of the United States is saying, because most people aren't following the stuff on Twitter. So aren't we performing a role there or not?
And I think it's the idea of the truth sandwich, right? You have to report on Trump, right? You don't always, and in fact, less and less you do have to report on Trump. But when you did have to report on him when he was in the zeitgeist, you would report on him while saying the truth. You would say the truth, like Trump lost the election. Then you would repeat Trump's lie, and at the end, you would repeat the truth again. And I think that still has to happen. That kind of reiteration, that kind of truth sandwich.
So, John, just coming back to kind of the idea of the attention-seeking behavior of some of these people, and you mentioned the algorithms that help them. It's not just Musk. There's a broader discussion to be had on when or even if to engage with internet trolls. Last week, Greta Thunberg responded to a clearly trolling tweet from Andrew Tate, a man who, if you haven't heard of at home, you're very lucky. This is an awful human being who was bragging about his luxury car collection and told her, please provide your email address so I can send a complete list of my car collection and their respective enormous emissions. She actually responded with a quote to it, which has become one of the most liked tweets in the history of Twitter, saying, yes, please do enlighten me at, email me at, and you can read the rest of the email address. They can see that on screen. There was more back and forth. And anyway, he ended up getting arrested, Andrew Tate, for alleged human trafficking and rape in Romania. Some say a distinctive pizza box in one of his tweets helped out. But my point is, John, put aside the arrest. Let's say he hadn't got arrested. He was bragging about how he had got Greta Thunberg to respond to him and how he was going to get more followers from this and more money from this. And I'm a big Greta fan. And I thought she was hilarious in her responses. But I just thought to myself, is that someone we totally should not engage with, even for fun likes, even if we, humiliate them online? Because they are pure. He's not the former president. He's not the owner of Twitter. Those kind of people, they really are just looking for any kind of attention, even attention that involves them getting humiliated.
Mm-hmm. Last year at about this time, we had a great conversation about the process of rage farming. And Molly said something really interesting. You asked Molly about covering Trump, and she said, but we have to cover Trump. This is an important figure.
Yes.
Tate is not an important figure, but he is a traffic generating figure. And he did, in that brief moment after engaging with Greta, get exactly what he wanted, which is for a creepy, horrid person who desperately wanted to funnel people into what is effectively a scam called Hustler University. He was doing great marketing. He was getting his name out there. And for every 50 people who saw that and thought, this is terrible, this guy's a creep, one or two people thought, hey, this is interesting. And one of them went to his website and one of them signed up for his course, which made him money. So Tate was executing on a strategy. There's a reason why all the major platforms took Tate off. Half of it is the misogyny, but the other half is clearly what he's doing, which is he's a misogyny entrepreneur, in the same way that figures like Alex Jones are conspiracy entrepreneurs. It's not just about traffic and engagement. They make money off this. And the thing with Tate is it's a kind of a great little narrative buckle that the guy managed to get himself arrested. However, if he hadn't been arrested, as you say, this would have been a win for him.
Yes.
And I think we all recognize Twitter is a great place for professional wrestling, Twitter cage fights. And that was a really good one that we saw. What a smackdown. Oh my God, Greta with the chair, right? But at the same time, Tate got his name to millions, maybe hundreds of millions more people than he had before.
I'd avoided tweeting about him. And then I felt like, I got to tweet about this. This is so funny. But even though I tweeted about him, I was like, I've never tweeted about this guy before, but I must today because it's so funny and it's such a big story. But you're right. This is, this guy's... The problem is we live in an age where we think humiliating people matters. But some of these people, as I've said on this show before, how do you shame the shameless? He doesn't care if he's humiliated by Greta. He doesn't care if he's mocked. And Elon Musk has made it clear he doesn't care if people mock him as long as you give him $8. As he keeps saying, although actually I do think probably when he's going to bed at night, he probably does shed a tear when he's being mocked. But you make a good point that this is about entrepreneurship, and we're aiding in that, and we're doing it in a group way. And Molly, I want to bring you back in just before we finish and make a broader point, which is about our addiction to social media. A study from the National Bureau of Economic Research found that a third of social media use is caused by self-control problems. You and I both love Twitter. Do you think our respective addictions to the platform is putting us in a bubble in the same way that Elon Musk is clearly addicted to the site that he bought?
Right. Yeah, he really is addicted, and it's so grim in a way. He's lost all this money just, because he's got a social media addiction. Look, addiction, this is certainly, you and I both have real Twitter problems. Me, it's actually got me much more into writing. So, ultimately it's been okay. But yeah, it's a real problem. And for most people, there's almost no upside. In fact, it's really bad. Anytime I meet someone who's like a normal person with a normal job, I always say to them, like, you can only lose on Twitter. So it's very high stakes.
The Archbishop of Canterbury, former Archbishop of Canterbury, once said to me at a dinner, should I join Twitter? And I said, no, don't do it. And it's probably the best advice I've ever given a public figure. We'll have to leave it there. Molly Jong-Fast, John Scott Railton, appreciate you both. Thank you for your time.